Well, we're so thankful that you're here. We're thankful for all the volunteers that have made this possible. I don't know about you. I enjoyed the story of the little watchman. I thought, would anyone notice if I came and sat with all the 5th grade and under kids? It was tempting, but I don't know. I thought the coat might give it away. The Christmas season is a season of watching. It's a season of anxious anticipation. In the Christmas season, we know it comes every year, and it's kind of unique in that the Christmas season seems like it'll never come, and it sneaks up on us all at the same time. For young kids, the days from December 1st to December 25th feel like they take forever. For some of us young at heart, they feel like they take forever. For parents who have so much to plan and prepare for Christmas season and for the Christmas celebration, the days fly by. There's never enough time to prepare. The Christmas season is a season of anxious anticipation. And I know I've shared with you all month long because this is my favorite season. I love the Christmas celebration. I've always loved everything about it. I love all the different traditions that make Christmas so special. And everybody has their unique traditions. Every family has traditions, or has their own way of doing traditions. Every family has their own thing that prepares them and their hearts for what's to come. For me, there's several things that stand out. One of the things I love, first of all, is when we get the boxes down out of the attic. It's one of the toughest days of the year because there's so many boxes. But as we bring those boxes down, I know that Christmas is just around the corner. Now, granted, we might start a little earlier than most, the first week of November, but how long can you wait to prepare for something so special? We put them up and we watch the house transform from an ordinary house to a winter wonderland before our eyes, and the joy and the anxious anticipation, the excitement, it begins to build. The next step for us as a family is we go Christmas tree shopping. Anyone a live tree family? Raise your hand if you're a live tree family. Artificial tree? Man, really? It's something about the smell of a pine forest in your living room for a month and knowing that if something goes wrong, your whole house can burn down in 3 minutes just adds to the excitement. And so we go and we pick out the very perfect Christmas tree, and you look at all of the trees on the lot and you bring it home and you put it up and you decorate it. I love going Christmas shopping. Though I find most of the time I just follow Carissa around with a credit card and pay for everything that she picks out for all the family and friends. I love sitting on the couch and watching her wrap all of those gifts that she picked out for family and friends. I love that we get to gather as a church family. I love that the church all around the world gathers on Christmas Eve, the pinnacle of that anxious anticipation. I love that the Christmas Eve sermon is the longest sermon of the year. Nervous laughter. We even scripted the nervous laughter. I anticipated that. No, but I love it. And tonight is the night where all of the traditions, my traditions and your traditions, our family's traditions and your family's traditions, they've all built to this night, because when we go to bed, as we tell our little cousins, there's one more sleep until Christmas Day. Tomorrow we'll wake up and Christmas Day will be here, the time with family, the gifts, the joy, the celebration, and it's just so exciting. And then Christmas Day is fully enjoyed. Maybe it's a big breakfast or dinner time, and Christmas comes, and then tomorrow night Christmas goes, and we begin again a season of waiting. In fact, we put so much into Christmas, and rightfully so, it represents the birth of Christ. It's our opportunity to look back and remember what God accomplished through Jesus the night before Christmas, the very first year in Bethlehem. And we put all of our anxious anticipation and our joy and our celebration and our finances and our resources and our time and our energy into celebrating Christmas, and we enjoy the season of waiting. But while we celebrate Christmas looking back, and we celebrate Christmas looking back through 2,000 years of history, the early church didn't leave it just as a season of looking back. They looked at the Advent and thought about the time between the start of Advent and Christmas. And they thought about Christmas in terms of what God was still going to do through Christ. And when the early church celebrated Christmas, they weren't just celebrating what God had accomplished when Jesus came and laid in a manger. They began looking ahead at when Jesus would come back. Just like the story finished when Vicki read it to the kids, that we're all in a season. It's the night before, and we live in the night before. In fact, Kyle Idleman said this about the night before. He said, remembering the birth of Christ, or the birth of Jesus, should cause us to anticipate the return of Jesus. And I wonder if we look ahead with the same anxious anticipation for what God's going to do through Jesus as we do to the celebration of what he's already done. As we think through that, what's still to come, I don't know about you, that makes me a little uneasy. And I hate to say that even as a preacher, something about the uncertainty of what's still to come. We know what Jesus is doing and we know he's going to come back for his church, but there's so much unknown. And we can read the Bible from one cover to another and there's still questions that we don't have good answers to. All we know is that God is doing something through Jesus to prepare what's to come. And it causes this anxious anticipation. And it causes nervousness and uncertainty. And maybe that's been your experience. Maybe that's why we spend so much time at Christmas looking back instead of looking ahead. Well, Jesus' closest followers, his disciples, they remembered a time with that same anxious anticipation that we experience looking ahead. In fact, John, one of the men that was closest to Jesus during his life and his ministry, records a time when him and the other disciples, they were gathered in an upper room in the city of Jerusalem, and they didn't know it yet, but it would be the last time that they gathered for a meal. And they were celebrating Passover, and Jesus began to explain some things to them, things that they didn't want to hear. He began to explain that though it was good that he was in their presence right then, he was about to leave. And though it was good that he came and he spent time with them and invested in them and met with them face to face, the time was coming and had now come where he was about to leave. And they didn't like that because they were comfortable with the idea that Jesus was with them, and they didn't want they were uncomfortable with the idea that he was going to go somewhere else. And so they began asking questions, and they began to try to convince him to stay with them. And I wonder if sometimes that's like us. We like to celebrate Christmas because it represents God with us. And we never stop to think about what it's going to be like when we are again with God. And so Jesus, knowing the nervousness in the room and knowing the anxiety level was on a rise and knowing how they felt, he shared some of these words in John 14:1. He said, "Let not your hearts be troubled." I mean, Jesus knows us. He knows that looking ahead at what's to come, and anytime there's uncertainty, it creates a little bit of anxiousness. And it's not anxious anticipation, it's just uneasiness, and it's anxiousness. And so he says, "Let not your hearts be troubled." And then he gives what looks like the antithesis of trouble. He says, "Believe in God, believe also in me." Now, it's kind of unique and it's kind of peculiar because my guess is those 12 guys, they did believe in God. I mean, they may have been raised to be fishermen or tax collectors, but they were still raised in the Jewish faith. And they still went to the synagogue, and they still offered sacrifices, and they still went through the traditions. And my guess is each and every one of them in the room believed in God. My guess is that each and every one of us believe in God. Why would you be here celebrating the birth of Christ if you didn't think there was something to celebrate? And he says, "Do not let your hearts be troubled. Don't be anxious. There's something great to come. Believe in God. Believe also in me." And though they understood and though they believed, he knew about them what he knows about us, that we need something more to hold on to. And so while Jesus was still with them, he went on and described what was to come. He said in verse 2, "In my Father's house there are many rooms." And we know he's not describing a literal house, but it's this imagery of heaven as of our eternal dwelling with him. He says, "In my Father's house there are many rooms. If it were not so, would I have told you that I'm going to prepare a place for you? And if I go and prepare a place for you, I'll come again and take you to myself, that where I am, you may also be." And Jesus described something. He described what was to come. And he says, "I've been there and I came from there, and my Father is preparing this place, and I'm about to leave and I'm about to go. And if I go, I will come back and take you to be with me." And we look at that and we think about a Father's house and we try to envision what it would look like. And we make up songs about a big, big house with lots and lots of rooms where we can play football, if maybe you've heard the song. But Jesus isn't describing a place because our inheritance, the prestige of our inheritance, isn't in the size of the house. It's in the presence of Christ. And so he goes on and he tells his disciples, he says, "You know the way to where I am going." Is anyone directionally impaired? No, you're going to leave me up here by myself. I am so directionally impaired. I have lived in Central Florida my entire life. I've lived as far south as Kissimmee. and now as far north as the land. This area has been my home for 28 years. And yet still, I find myself getting on I-4 going east when I should go west. Anyone ever do that? I find myself getting on the 417 going south when I live north. I should know the way, and yet I still struggle with it. And I wonder if we're directionally impaired spiritually. The disciples, they didn't know the way to where he was going, and so they begin to ask questions. And I wonder if, much like the disciples, we know that God has done something through Jesus. We're here to celebrate Christmas. This couldn't have existed for 2,000 years. This tradition, this movement could not have survived 2,000 years if there was not some truth behind the claim. But we don't know the way. And we've grown up and we've gone to different churches and we've heard different preachers, and everybody has different ideas. And they say there's different ways. There's different things you must do. And maybe you grew up with a rule-based system. Maybe they gave you a lot of different rules and said, if you want to go to heaven, if you want to spend eternity with Jesus, you follow these rules. Don't run in church. You ever hear that? Don't run in church? I grew up in a church with two sides with like 25 pews. And I didn't run in church, but I would get in the back and roll under all of those pews all the way to the front until I was sick. And that's why we have chairs in our church, because I know how kids think. And then I would roll all the way back, and I thought, if the rule to going to heaven is don't run in church, I'm never going to get anywhere near heaven. And we developed this rules-based system where we think, if I don't follow all the rules, I'm not going to get there. It's very similar to how we approach Christmas and Santa Claus, right? I mean, Santa Claus, he knows when you've been what? Bad or good. I mean, parents tell us that. My parents still tell me that. He knows when you've been bad or good. They want to make sure that we're following the rules to get the reward we want. And kids, you should, because Santa does know. You'll find out tomorrow. But we treat God the same way. Parents, you threaten it. You will threaten that until they go to bed tonight. He knows when you're sleeping, or he knows if you've been good or bad. But we treat God the same way. We treat God kind of the same way, that if we follow all the rules, maybe we will get to experience what he has to offer. And we don't really know what the rules are, and so we fill things in. Like, we try to watch what we say until someone cuts us off in traffic, and then we break the rules, right? In our church attendance, it's pretty good, or at least we haven't missed a Christmas or Easter service in like 12 years, except for that one time when the weather was so good. But God understands that, right? Or maybe we're like a diehard about saying Merry Christmas. If someone says Happy Holidays to you as you're checking out a store, you just like go off on them, right? You say Jesus is the reason for the season, and it's Merry Christmas. And we try to have these rules that are close to us, and yet still there's that anxiousness, there's that uneasiness, because we don't really know where we stand. We try to do our best, but if we're honest, we know we've messed up. One thing I've found, that much like Santa Claus and the rules-based system, it didn't really seem to matter how good I was. In my worst years, I went to bed Christmas Eve, and I woke up Christmas morning, and there were presents under the tree. And some were from Santa, and some were from my parents. And I found that a lot of times, or actually all the time, the relationship always trumped the behavior. Now, don't get me wrong. The desire for the presents changed my behavior. A love for God changes the way we live, and it changes our behavior. But the relationship always trumped the rules. It always trumped the punishment. It's the same way with God. He says, and you know the way to where I'm going. Thomas said to him, Lord, we do not know where you are going. How can we know the way? Jesus said to him some of the most famous words in all of Scripture. He says, I am the way. You want to know the way to heaven? You want to know the way to a relationship with God? Jesus says, I am the way. It's not the religious system. It's not some faith tradition. It's not the faith that was passed on to you by your parents or grandparents. It's not in church attendance. All of those things are important, and all of them are beneficial. But Jesus says to his disciples, when their uneasiness is at its pinnacle, I am the way. And he says, I am the truth. I am the truth about God. You hear all of these different things and all of these different ideas and all of these different perspectives and all of these different preachers, and all of them have different ideas about who God is. And Jesus looks at his disciples. He says, I'm not only the way, I'm also the truth. And then he goes on, he says, and I am the life. I am life eternally. I am true life on this earth. In fact, later he would pray in John 17 that they would enjoy life, and this is life, that they know God. And then he says this statement. He says, no one comes to the Father except through me. Now, that's one of those phrases that is often taken out of context, and especially in our politically correct, ultra-sensitive world, it's thrown around and pointed at how Jesus is so insensitive and he's so intolerant. And you have to take it completely out of context, because what Jesus is saying, when there was no way, I provided a way. When you didn't know what the truth was, I came as a person and I provided the truth. When you didn't have life and you were just struggling to get by, I came and I gave a purpose and a fulfillment to your life. He says, no one comes to the Father except through me, but I am the way. I am the truth. I am the life. And then he goes on and he says this, if you had known me, you would have known my Father also. From now on, you do know him and have seen him. Jesus says you can experience God. You can know God. You don't have to have an uneasiness because you can know me. And that really is the celebration of Christmas. That when there was no way to the Father, that God sent Jesus, born of a virgin, miraculously in the fulfillment of time, so that while we were far from God, we could see the face of God. It's why he stepped down from heaven, from God's right hand, and he lived life as a man, just like us, so that we could see God in a way that we could relate to him. And in this season of joy and celebration and anxious anticipation for the arrival of Christmas Day, I wonder how often we anxiously anticipate for what God is still going to do. That he's provided a place for us. He's provided a relationship for us. This next year, 2018, at Plymouth Avenue Christian Church, we're going to spend the year with Jesus. And if you're not sure, and if you would rather not think about what's to come because you're not sure where you stand with Jesus or how you could even know, we're going to spend the year getting to know him, his life, his ministry, his teaching, his miracles, his parables, so that we know the way, the truth, and the life. It's the celebration of Christmas. Heavenly